Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 46, Prodigies. We'll start off with some Star Trek news, and then we're talking about the series premiere of Star Trek Prodigy, Lost and Found.
And then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, Prodigies. We're going to be talking about introducing kids to Star Trek, but also about introducing them to the scriptures and the gospel. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Stick around. How was your Halloween, Mike?
My Halloween was nice. It was nice. We went down this weekend as part of our festivities to the school where my son's in college to watch him in the college marching band.
Nice.
And you know what occurred to me, Kevin? I used to think that temporal dilation was just a sci-fi phenomenon. But they say a football game is only 60 minutes, but we were there for 3 hours. And we were just there for the band, really. The game was fine, but I know about time dilation from firsthand experience now. How was your Halloween weekend?
Oh, you're taking me back to time dilation experiences I had in high school band. Our Halloween was good. My son was a pirate, and we had a good time. We had fun. It was a pretty simple production this year, but it was enjoyable. We had a good time. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. We had that special Spooky Trek episode last week that we released just in time for Halloween. Had our cool guest. It was a lot of fun.
Great discussion with Reed.
Yep.
I did not see any Star Trek costumes out and about this year. I don't know how things were in your neck of the woods.
I didn't either. I have a friend who sent me a picture of her. It was actually the first time she's been able to dress up in a proper costume, for Star Trek, like a proper Star Trek uniform. And she'd gotten her first one and sent it to me, and I was like, that is so cool.
And what variation of uniform did she have?
It was like the TOS Uhura red.
Classic TOS. Nice.
Very cool, very cool. I kind of wanted one when she was, but yeah, it was great. So, so that's the only Star Trek costume I saw this year. That's true. Although our friend Neil Shirley has this great Substack that he does called Star Trekking, and
yes.
And he showed some images of the Star Trek costumes they had when he was a kid, which is
I can't wait.
Well, those the ones that were available at the time. Those ones with
from. I want to say Ben Nye, but that's a makeup company. I don't.
Right.
But I know.
Right.
Yeah, the one with the character's name printed on the plastic top.
Yeah, you got the plastic mask, and then basically a plastic sack with armholes cut in it, with the character printed on it.
Right.
It's with the character's name, and it's very, very corny and bad. But it's a great issue of the Substack. So go check out Star Trekking. So, I think we can get into some Star Trek news, though, I think. Yeah?
Let's do. And I brought some Star Trek musical news. I was very excited to... of course, you've been telling me, I think even on the show, how great Lower Decks score is, musical score.
I have.
And I had never denied it, but I didn't fully appreciate how great it was till I was finally listening to it for the first time in isolation. And I had to get on Discord right away and gush to you. Oh, you were right. This is such great stuff. So all of you out there in listener land, if you haven't listened to the Lower Decks orchestral score yet, go to your favorite streaming service and listen to it, because it's magnificent stuff. And if you heard it out of context for the first time and didn't know it was from Lower Decks, you'd swear it was from a Star Trek movie. It's just that good and sounds that much like Horner and Goldsmith at their best. But so that made me especially excited to see that while we had to wait 2 seasons for any music from Lower Decks to be available, Star Trek Prodigy's soundtrack is going to debut on a weekly basis throughout season 1.
Nice.
As each episode premieres. So, and this is music from composer Nami Malamed, who is the first woman to ever compose for Star Trek. Can you believe? I never didn't dawn on me, but it's about time. 55 years into the franchise, it's about time. But those episodes' scores will be released every week. And hearing the score in the context of the episode, which we're going to talk about, I was very impressed. So I can't wait to hear it in all its isolated glory.
Yeah, well, I tell you, yes, Lower Decks, all of Star Trek right now has been impressing me with the music.
Yeah.
We've got Jeff Russo's work for Picard and Discovery, Chris Westlake's music for Lower Decks, and then we've got Nami Malumad now for Prodigy. But what's interesting about Prodigy, we have these series with these shorter season orders, episode orders per season.
Yeah.
And so that allows us to have one composer for the series, or at least per season, which we've never had before.
Development, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have 2, maybe 3. I think TNG. We had Jay Chataway and Dennis McCarthy and Ron Jones, so you had 3 of them. But they were pretty steady. But this is the first time. But what's interesting is each of these composers, Jeff Russo and Chris Westlake, got to write new Star Trek themes, like opening title themes, but Nami Malumad did not.
I did notice that. I was thinking at times, boy, this part sounds really a lot like Michael Giacchino's work for Star Trek 2009, and turns out he wrote the theme for Prodigy. But so I did wonder about that. I don't know why she didn't get to write a new theme, but she gets to score everything else. So
I mean, I love Giacchino's score for it.
Sure.
It's great. It's really his theme. It's really good.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
But I'm really excited. Nami's music is fantastic. I was really enjoying what I was hearing in within the episode of Prodigy. So, yeah, it's exciting.
I'm glad to see that music is being restored to a place of prestige in the Star Trek franchise.
Yeah, that's very cool because it's always been a good music franchise. It really has, and I think music is a big part of Star Trek's appeal. Well, I feel an episode brewing, but anyway.
Let me know when. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good news, but I do have some not so good news to share, some sad news to share. Just this past week, Camile Saviola died at age 71. She is the actor who played Kai Opaka.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anything about a cause of death for her. But she was, Kai Opaka everybody loves, and it's because of Camille.
I know. And I didn't realize she was only in 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine, right?
I know, it doesn't feel like it.
I had memories of clearly that character makes and she is an actor, and that character makes such an impression on screen. I had a completely distorted view of how much she was in the show, but
well, and you spend the entire time that when Adami is Kai, wishing for Kai Opaka, so she's always on your mind.
No kidding, yeah.
But yeah, she was just one of those beautiful bright lights in Star Trek, and I was really sad to see that we lost her, because that means if there is some Deep Space Nine something down the line, we'll never probably get to see Kai Opaka again, or if we do, she'll be played by somebody else, and so it's.
Yeah, it is a shame when they have to recast for reasons of, well, when the performer who originated the role is no longer with us. I presume if they were to bring back Deep Space Nine, they'd have to do that with Odo and Nog too, since neither
that's true.
Rene Auberjonois or
I
Eisenberg
doubt they'd recast any of that. I don't think there's any way to do it. I think they would go on without the characters.
They probably, I guess. Yeah. You could continue the story without Nog, I suppose. He'd just be off in Starfleet, and I guess Odo returned to the spoilers for the end of Deep Space Nine.
yeah. Sorry.
I guess he returned to the Great Link, so he wouldn't have to.
That's true.
I don't know though, but both those characters. I mean, I know Nog was only quote unquote a recurring character, but both he and Odo were such a part of the fabric of that show. I don't know what a Deep Space Nine revival would be like. I mean, the story didn't really end, I suppose, since Bajor never got into the Federation on screen. I know that happened in later novels, but I don't know. Do you hope there'll be a Deep Space Nine revival in some way, shape, or form?
I would love to see everybody from every part of Star Trek come back in some way. Every time I see these people, no matter who they are, I think, ooh, they could still do it. You know, look at them. They're vibrant. They're here. They're with us. Let's do more Star Trek with them. Every time I see any of my beloved Star Trek actors. So, yeah, absolutely. Sure. I'm always up for more Star Trek.
Like if William Shatner can go to space at age 90, he could sure play Captain Kirk one more time.
Sure.
At least one more time, I should say.
Right. So you've got another piece of news.
I do. Speaking of recognizing how great Star Trek is, Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard both won at the recent Saturn Awards, which are the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror's equivalent to the Emmys and the Oscars and every other kind of award. But yeah, Picard and Discovery were both nominated for Best Series, but the third season of Discovery edged out Picard for Best Science Fiction Television Series. And Doug Jones won the award for Best Supporting Actor on a television series. But Picard didn't go away empty-handed either, because Sir Patrick himself was a winner for his work in Picard's first season. So both those shows will have some awards momentum behind them as they come back.
That's fantastic. I always like to see Star Trek winning awards. We've talked about several awards that Star Trek has won, that recent Star Trek has won on the show, and it's good to see those coming in. You know, some of them are more. You know, well, it always wins in more special interest categories and more special interest award shows, or awards, but it's been really cool to see things like acting and directing and writing, you know, really, really honored in Star Trek, because I feel like that's often overlooked.
Well, and longtime fans know it's not often you can talk about Star Trek winning awards. So it is nice to, I mean, we don't need the external validation, but it's nice when it comes.
Yep. That's true. That's really true. Well, and the last thing I'm going to say is that there's kind of a big thing. The new head of Paramount Pictures right now is Brian Robbins, and he has confirmed that there's planning for multiple Star Trek films, including an animated movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's really interesting to see, you know, what they're talking about, because, you know, the Star Trek animation is becoming a big and viable thing with both Lower Decks and Prodigy. And I think Prodigy particularly is pushing things forward in terms of animation, like the depth and the quality of animation is really great. I think the animation quality on Lower Decks is really good too, but it is generally simpler than Prodigy.
It's more cartoony by design, but it's a more of a just two-dimensional cartoon.
Right, with a lot of three-dimensional elements mixed in. And very well done. But it's really showing that you know, animated Star Trek can be legitimate Star Trek, which, you know, fans of the original animated series like me know and have known for a long time, even though even that series itself falls well short of the mark on more than one occasion. But so that's interesting to me. But then also it looks like they're looking at, you know, the Kelvin Timeline films, and also that project which we mentioned earlier, which is being written by Kalinda Vasquez, which is a separate project. So she's not writing, I don't think, the next Kelvin Timeline film. I think she's doing something else, based on the information I've got here. Listeners can peruse the article and learn more. But yeah, I think 2023 is when we might start seeing another Star Trek film.
You know, it'll be interesting if there's prime timeline material being produced and released alongside Kelvin Timeline material, and whatever this animated thing. I guess, is there speculation that'll be Prodigy, or it would be yet another new animated property? I can't see Lower Decks making the jump to the big screen.
They are having some conversations about what, I mean, that's kind of the foundation of the idea of an animated film is an animated a cinematic theatrical film version of Prodigy. So
we could
that's
have
possible, or something else.
we could have Star Trek Into the Multiverse with
Right,
you know
right.
I'd be up for that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what's interesting about it is I think this is something that more people are opening up to doing, which is telling multiple kinds of stories within the same universe, which is something that the comic book world has done for a long time.
Absolutely,
And which I've always thought comic book movies should do. That there should be that it shouldn't just be, one Superman right now. There could be two, there could be three. You could have different kinds of
The
stories.
more the merrier.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell different kinds of stories about different kind of versions of the character.
Right.
Played by different actors, directed by different people, written by different people, And so I see things moving a little bit more in that direction now. And, DC's doing a little bit by releasing their animated stuff direct to DVD. And there's a lot of good stuff. All the good DC movies are animated. And then while they're also doing the main feature films for whatever reason. And then and then the Marvel universe is doing things like that too with the television series and stuff, and Star Trek's doing. And so I like seeing that. I like seeing that a franchise and a universe can balance multiple perspectives at once. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So.
And it keeps things from becoming so rote and so predictable.
Yep.
Streaming does open up so many more possibilities, and it's not the same people making Discovery as making Picard, as making Lower Decks, as making Prodigy. Right. So you can have all kinds of exciting things happening in all corners of the franchise at once, and it's neat. And and as fans, you can take what you want, and you don't have to take what you don't want. And nobody's forcing you to watch any of it. Nobody's forcing you to watch all of it. I think it's a great time just to have it playing out on that level,
Yes, absolutely. I think so too, and it's very exciting. That's I think helpful from a creative standpoint too. When you're creating something, I think it's great that the Star Trek that we had, which was largely behind the scenes, driven by a lot of the same people,
right?
That it kind of ran its course. And new people have picked up where they left off, and some of the old people are helping too, like Jonathan Frakes and Nick Meyer and those kinds of people. So I think it's great. I think it's fantastic, and it's a great time to be a Star Trek fan. And one of the things that makes this a great time to be a Star Trek fan is Star Trek Prodigy, in my opinion.
Oh, well, I concur.
Yeah. Oh, well, good. Review over. We're done. This concludes.
That's all you need to know, folks. Kevin and I like it.
Liked it.
Hey, what else do you need to know? Don't listen to the critics. Don't listen to the haters.
Yep. Are there haters for Star Trek Prodigy?
Oh, I suspect,
Probably.
but I have not actively gone in search of them.
It's a Star Trek tradition. There have to be haters.
Yeah, but I have heard people express some concern before the show came out, and I wondered, is it going to seem like too much of a kid's show? I know this was a show aiming to get kids into Star Trek.
Right.
The only time I felt talked down to was when I watched Prodigy was the Frosted Flakes commercials on Paramount Plus. So if you can spring for the non-ad supported plan, you don't even have to watch those. I thought this show just really, yes, it's aimed at a young audience, but it is not dumbed down. It's not stupid. It's not silly. It's not mawkish or any of those things you might associate with kids programming. It just was a really, I found, engrossing story right from the get-go.
Yes.
I think the idea of reintroducing us to the Star Trek universe through characters we've never met before in a portion of that universe we've never seen before, with very few, well, I can't say very few connections to what we have seen before, but it's not Easter eggs and it's not fan service, because it's just taking them as the building blocks of this story, So, one of the characters happens to be a Tellarite, but you don't need to know Journey to Babel. And one of the characters is a Medusan, but you don't need to know, is there in truth no beauty? You know, and there's a Kazon who shows up at the beginning. Spoilers, by the way, if you haven't watched Prodigy yet, go watch it before you listen.
Go watch Prodigy.
But, so from this point forward, but my point is, this is a brilliant way to as I thought about it, to kind of invite us to fall in love with Star Trek all over again. Because I think you could argue that not since The Cage has there been a pilot episode of Star Trek that does so much heavy lifting to build a world from the get-go that's original. Because even The Next Generation, you had the concept of Starfleet, and you had a spaceship named Enterprise, and you had a Klingon, and Dr. McCoy makes a cameo, right? I mean, so you've got some points of connection. You've got Patrick Stewart giving an updated version of the William Shatner monologue at the beginning. I mean, it falls into familiar patterns. And Deep Space Nine and Voyager are direct spin-offs of The Next Generation, and Enterprise is a prequel to the original series, and it starts off with lots of, there's familiar things in place. But this, I mean, you could argue it felt familiar in some ways to stuff like Star Wars, but even Star Wars is borrowing from things that came before too. I just found it a very fast-paced, enjoyable space adventure with some immediately likable characters, and oh yeah, it happens to be in the Star Trek universe. Yeah. And so if you're familiar with the Star Trek universe, all the stuff that's there that you see, that's cool, but that's not where the focus is. And again, it's not even like I said, it's not Easter eggs like Lower Decks, like, oh, I get that joke, isn't that funny? It's just texture that's there, and it's being used to build something new that, obviously, with Catherine Janeway showing up as a hologram, we're going to tie more closely into Star Trek that we know as the show goes on. But just what a fun space adventure these two episodes are. And I've watched it 2.5 times now, and I'm really, really enjoying it.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting because, yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't. Yeah, you might be right about The Cage. I don't know. There's a lot of world building that had to be done in TNG and Deep Space Nine, I think. But yeah, but they do function on a lot of things that are already there, and Prodigy does, because we do eventually end up in the Protostar, which exists within some things that are established in Star Trek. But yeah, there's a lot that has to be done to create the world that we meet when we start, and where we're coming from. But what's really interesting, and this is a credit to Nami Mlamed in her score, as I'm watching the first scene. We don't really have in the part Lost and Found Part 1 and 2. We don't really have an opening title sequence. I'd already seen the opening title sequence, which I loved and excited me for the series more than anything else had. But we don't have that, so it's all the opening is beautiful, calling back to the Alexander Courage score, and then Nami just leads into her work, and these opening shots. I'm seeing this mine and all these things, and it's beautifully done. So beautiful, and everything is so deep and rich and colorful, and I'm enjoying it, but I'm hearing the music, and I really think it's the score that makes me feel like I'm watching Star Trek, which I didn't always get. Like you don't get necessarily at the beginning of Picard, even though Jean-Luc is there.
Right.
The context is so different.
Yeah.
That series doesn't feel like Picard, doesn't feel like Star Trek in very many ways.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because we're going somewhere we don't normally go in Star Trek. I won't say we've never gone there before, but it's certainly a place we've never seen, a planet we've never seen, species we've never seen before. We've been to other mining colonies and things, but never this place.
Right.
And so it's a little out of step or out of place, but man, that music just grounds you. And what I found interesting as I was watching it was like I was loving that, and I was into it because of that, and I was excited. And I hadn't been that excited watching Star Trek since the premiere of Discovery. When I first saw the premiere of Discovery, because it was my first time to get to watch new Star Trek in like 20 years.
Yeah.
I felt that way very much again when I was watching Prodigy. But at the same time, in the midst of this stuff that's going on to try to get Dal out of the mining camp where he is, and get our characters together and get them to find the protostar and all that stuff that has to happen in what is really the first episode, even though it plays as one long thing. I started thinking, now wait a minute. I'm excited about watching this because I know it's new Star Trek. If I didn't know this was new Star Trek, what would I be thinking what would I be feeling? And I would say, I would think this was really exciting and really interesting, and I would be captivated by this visually, and I'd really want to see what was happening next, and I'd love the characters all on their own.
Absolutely. I think Dal has a little in common with Luke Skywalker in Episode 4. You know, but to speak to the difference between them, Luke just felt like a prisoner. Dal really is.
Really is.
So I didn't mind that too much. But yeah, I found him a very likable character. I'm eager to get to know Gwen more. I felt like she wasn't served as well in this opening story, but I think she will be, because they set up a lot of mystery about her. We know she's the daughter of the diviner, Solon the diviner, who runs this prison planet, and who's connected somehow to the ship. So anyway, I'm trusting that that very quickly we'll get more on Gwen and what her story is, and because she's clearly, even though she's subservient to her father, but she's grudging about it, right? And rightly so, because her father seems terrible at this point. But she seems a very compassionate person, and she's very tender to that Cation, that little kitty cat Cation, who the Kazon brings in at the beginning. Which I want to know what happens to that kid, that kitten, now that Jen Gwen's not there. But so clearly she's not just following her father's footsteps. She's got this hunger to see the stars that Dal does too, and so I'd like to know some more about her, and I think that'll come very quickly. I get that this story was more Dal's story, and we're seeing it through his viewpoint primarily. But I found them both. I think they're going to end up being the two leads, and I think they're both very interesting and compelling characters so far. So I'm eager to see more.
Yep, me too. I am too. I'm really excited about the series. I'm really enjoying it.
I liked all the characters.
Yeah, there have been some really clever things too. In this episode already, that shows how they're working within canon but trying new stuff. So, like, there's a new kind of version of the comm badge. There's always a new comm badge, but it looks really good. It looks really cool. And then, like, the Protostar, it's a new design. It's an experimental ship. When have we ever seen a Starfleet vessel with stairs in it before? Like,
I hadn't even picked up on that.
They're walking up the steps, and I'm like, where's the turbo lift? Why are you walking upstairs? and then there's that great moment when Dal is on the hull of the ship, trying to get those shields turned on or whatever. And when he does, he gets the shields on and he is on the hull, and then Dreadnought is, leaping and lands on the shields.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, wow, I've never thought about somebody being on the space between the hull
by the shields
and the shields. It's just like Lower Decks just did with the outer hull and the inner hull, I never thought about that. And the same thing, like I never thought, it was such a clever use of the shields. And I like that. I like when people take the knowledge and the tools we have in the Star Trek universe and use them in new and clever ways. And that was a tiny little indicator of what might be to come. So that enticed me.
They set up so many mysteries that, but again, I only thought about it after I finished watching. I wasn't ticking them off as I watched the first time, but looking back, like, what's that ship doing there? Why did that ship come to be?
Yep.
Because it's a design, like you said, it's kind of reminiscent of Voyager, but it's not exactly the same. It's very different. Yep. And again, the back history of this prison planet and this species that Solon and Gwen are the last of, and what is exactly, somebody had to point out to me that Solon is connected apparently to the Protostar. I was getting kind of a Darth Vader, General Grievous vibe off of him. He needs life support, whatever. But this review I read said, once the ship's gone, he's in bad shape. Oh, that's true. So, and he says his last words in the episode are, "Get me my ship," So what's that all about? And just some fascinating mysteries that. But again, they're not foregrounded. They're there to be, I presume, expounded upon later,
Yeah.
and more light yet to be revealed. But again, it's another way of adding texture to the show just right from the get-go. And it doesn't feel like a puzzle box kind of mystery either. It's not, because it's not foregrounded. It's just part of another building block.
Well, and that's kind of the thing, like you say, there's stuff that's just kind of there. Like, we don't think about, we're on the asteroid Tars Lamora. Well, we've never heard of that before. But there's a Kazon there. Well, what does that tell us? We're in the Delta Quadrant.
Right. And there's some reference to he's already brought us every child and orphan this side of the Delta or something like that.
Yeah, see, they said this side of the Delta. I wasn't sure, but as people have talked about it behind the scenes, I've learned, yeah, we are in the Delta Quadrant. And of course, I should know that because the Kazon's there.
Right.
And so just that is like, wow, that makes it even more mysterious that the protostar ended up on this asteroid. Like, how did this even happen?
And how are all these people prisoners there? I mean, what
where did they come from?
There are Alpha Quadrant species there, right? The Medusan is there, and the Tellarite is there.
Yeah.
So and apparently Rock's species, the Bricar, were introduced in a novel, and so this is something from Literary Trek making its on-screen canonical debut. Yeah,
well, that happens when they talk about speaking standard and things like that. So
right,
and that has been happening in contemporary Trek. The Literary Trek has been working its way in. So that's interesting too. And it is true. When I was listening to Kevin and Dan Hegeman talk about this, the show creators. How the ship got on this asteroid is kind of the big mystery of the season.
Yeah.
So we will be unpacking that. But you're right; it doesn't make a big deal out of that stuff. It's just there, and then we'll learn more as we go. So it's exciting.
It's like uncut child sci-fi dream, right? You find your own spaceship. I love the scene. I love the scene when Dal and Rock are manacled together in the deep core mining, and Dal is sketching out his plan. He draws like the stereotypical 1950s rocket ship showing how he wants, and then it's the protostar's not that, but it's this dream of, man, if I had a spaceship and could go anywhere. I mean, how could you I think you'd have to be really hard-hearted to not relate to that on some level if you're any kind of science fiction fan, let alone a Star Trek fan. I mean, playing spaceship, that comes with the territory. So I think that's one reason this story just got its hooks into me real fast, because we find the ship 15 minutes in. It's not the big reveal of the episode or something, it becomes the crux of the action. That's my ticket out of here. And Zero telling him you need 20 people for a ship like this, and gathering the crew together. And oh man, I'm grinning ear to ear. You can't hear me on a podcast, but to just thinking about it, and when that ship is revealed, that's a beautiful moment. The animation, as we've alluded to, is just gorgeous. I mean, it's so rich, and Lower Decks has its moments where it's gorgeous, but it's not the same kind of style. It's not this. It's just wow. I mean, this is meant to be immersive, I think, and
it is.
It totally is. Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to the next episode. I think it's a great series. It's exciting. I can't wait to show it to my son, and that's a great thing. I mean, I've run into some problems showing Star Trek to my son, and it's been a little frustrating for me as a parent. In fact, I got a survey from Paramount Plus before Prodigy came out, and it was asking me all about my interests and everything, but they really drove hard into are you a parent? I'm like, yes, and I talk about my, tell them how old my kid is and everything. And they kept asking questions about, do you, want to watch, or do you watch like Lower Decks with your child? Or do you watch this, Discovery with your child, or that sort of thing? And every one of them, it was like a hard no. And
right.
I could tell, and I could tell that they're really interested in whether people are contemporarily engaging with Star Trek with their kids, because I think that's kind of been a complaint about Star Trek, about newer Star Trek to this point, that it has gone into more mature areas, and so therefore people have said, well, no, this isn't good, because Star Trek is a family show. It's always been a family show, and I watched it with my dad and all that, and I watched it with my mom and all that kind of stuff. And It is to a point, but definitely newer Trek has leaned away from that, and definitely Prodigy opens itself up to that. But as a parent, I have had my own struggles with introducing my kid to Star Trek. So I think it'll be interesting if we talk about that.
All right. It'll either be a spectacular discussion or a terrible end to our podcast.
That was a Prodigy quote, kids at home. If you didn't notice, Zero said that.
Spoilers.
in the second half of Lost and Found. Just letting you know.
Oh, introducing, well, when I was a teenage Star Trek fan, I wanted to introduce my parents to Star Trek.
Oh, right.
And we were all going to go see Star Trek 4 together. And so I set up a big presentation of all I thought they'd need to know in advance of seeing Star Trek 4. Like, these are photon torpedoes and these are how they work. I had no concept of, some things you just don't need to explain at all, right? Because I was so enthused and enthusiastic. So, but I have tried to introduce my kids to Star Trek. I have 2 kids, and have a 50% success record. I showed my son the episode from the original series, Arena, and he really liked it. And I thought that was a good choice because it's kind of a classic Star Trek morality play episode, and we could all kind of laugh together at the rubber suit, the Gorn and all, but still the story is sound enough and the acting is sound enough that, it didn't matter that we could see William Shatner's lace-up boots on a high-def screen, that it was still, and he found really compelling the bit where Kirk doesn't want to make peace early on in the episode. He wants to keep chasing the Gorn, even though it's taxing the ship's engines, and Spock is like, hold up, Jim, a little. He's trying to talk some logic and peace into him. And my son found that very interesting. My daughter, she picked up a little bit just by osmosis, but her really big intro to Star Trek was Star Trek 4. One with the whales.
Yeah, there you go.
In fact, one year, I'll tell a story on myself. They back to school night every year. Sometimes the teachers have you fill out a quiz about how well do you know your child, right? Like, what's their favorite this, that, and the other. And one of the blanks on this year's quiz, well, not this year, it was when she was a few years younger, but the blank was, my child's favorite movie is, and I thought, well, I could put Star Trek 4 because she had wanted to watch it like time. We watched it a lot for a while there, and so I thought, but no, kids aren't supposed to like, it's not cool for kids to like Star Trek. So I'll put down Star Trek, Star Wars, The Force Awakens, because she liked that a lot too. She liked Rey, So then the next day after she gets the quiz back, the kids grade the parents' quizzes. She comes home and says, "Dad, why didn't you put Star Trek 4 as my favorite movie?" Like, well, sorry. I thought you'd want me to put The Force Awakens. Well, I like that too, but I like Star Trek 4 better. So even though I keep trying, and I still haven't had success in getting her real interested in watching Star Trek 2 and 3, I say, you got to know the whole story. And I'm telling her, I'll bribe you with popcorn. That sometimes works, We'll make popcorn and we'll watch. But so far, but Star Trek 4, she's good. She likes that. She likes The Trouble with Tribbles. And we've been watching Deep Space Nine together. So, so I was able to get her interested in Star Trek by way of Star Trek 4. So how about you? How have you done?
Well, it's interesting. My son has really become a gamer in the past year or so, past 2 years. And so he's not as interested in Star Trek as he was. When he was younger, Star Trek was always around, because, his dad wrote a Star Trek.
His dad was writing a book about it.
So my book came out, when he was like 7. 7. And so, we went to a convention, and we all took a trip to Georgia, and he made a little sign, to wear as a hat that said, Star Trek books coming through, so that people would get out of the way, because he knew it was going to be crowded and all that. And and he loved tribbles. He was immediately drawn to tribbles.
Yeah.
And he would do a little on our trip. He would do a little tribble impression. Because he has a lot of hair, and he would get down behind something and just shake his head so you could just see his hair, and he'd go.
Oh, that's great.
And it was great. But then on that trip, we got to meet David Gerald, which was really great because I could be like, so you know who invented tribbles? He's like, no, who? I was like, that guy right there.
Oh, nice. Well, that would do it. Yeah.
But Trouble with Tribbles is still his favorite Star Trek episode. But we started with the original series. The first thing that I showed him was the Corbomite maneuver.
Excellent choice.
I thought that was a pretty classic Star Trek episode. Like, if you want to understand how a basic original series Star Trek episode works, you want to get the essential concept of Star Trek, here it is, the Corbomite maneuver. I still can't think of a better one. And so we did that, and we just started watching whatever ones he wanted to, whatever ones looked interesting to him out of the original series. And it was fun and it was good, but that I'm not as familiar with the original series sometimes. There are certain parts of the original series that I know backwards, forwards, upside down, inside out. Right. And there are other parts of the original series that I've maybe seen once or twice, and I don't really think about that often. Usually episodes that I don't like as much. And so, oddly enough. And so we would watch some of those episodes that I didn't remember as well. And I'd be like, oh, I forgot this was in here, because there's some racy stuff, particularly in the original series that made him uncomfortable and made me uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, drat, as he wasn't. I mean, he's 12 now, but, back then, oh boy. And
it's different when they're younger.
Yeah, and we ran into the same thing, like in Next Generation. I'd even show him an episode that I really liked and that I thought he would love, like Yesterday's Enterprise, and then I forgot about some of the violence in Yesterday's Enterprise, and like, oh, there's a shot of a person with a thing in their, the thing in their head that killed them,
right.
It's like, and so that's always been a bit of a challenge for me as a parent. Like, I've got to watch it first, whatever Star Trek it is, unless I'm very familiar with it. I've got to watch it first because maybe I haven't seen it in a few years. And even if I only saw it last year, I might not remember something, that...
And you watch with different eyes when your kid's sitting next to you. I mean, I've had that experience with other things that I... we showed our son Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail the first time. I'd forgotten about some of those things.
Yep. I'm being very careful with Monty Python. I showed him his first...
no, it's good to be careful.
Yeah, I showed him his first Monty Python sketch the other day, and he wants more of it, but I said, I've got to curate it for you, sir. Just wait.
Right.
But that's very much a thing with Star Trek. Like, it does kind of have this sense of being like a family show, and a lot of people started watching it when they were like 4 and 5 years old and things like that. And I guess when you're very young, there are some things that you view fairly uncritically, but there have always been issues, with certain episodes being too scary. I know when my son was younger and we watched The Man Trap, he made me stop it halfway through because that's a scary episode, And we should talk about that next year's Spooky Trek.
Here's a question. So you've said a couple of times now, Star Trek is and has always been a family show.
That's how people view
so?
it. Well, that's how people view it, and that's how people talk about it. But I don't know that that's true.
I mean, I don't think it was intended to be. I don't think it was intended to be an anti-family show necessarily. No. But I think Gene Roddenberry didn't necessarily view it as a family show in the terms of, if by family show you mean something that's totally safe to show the whole family. Now, maybe he would have said, and you've done more research into his life than I have, maybe he did say, watch it with your kids and talk about these sometimes very mature and serious ideas and issues. He might have seen it as a family show in that sense.
I think he would have no problem with that. I don't feel like, he would have been terribly protective. And I even struggle with that as a parent, how protective to be. But I've always had the ethic of letting my kid guide me, letting him show me what he's interested in and what excites him, what scares him, what upsets him,
Right.
and just being careful about what I show him, and then just gauging it as we go, has been really important and helpful. Um, but
That seems a wise approach to take, and it's empathic too, right?
mm,
I know when I was trying, my poor son again, when I was real excited about Doctor Who and thought, oh, come watch Doctor Who with us, it'll be great. It's this fun time travel show. Well, there's jokes in fandom about watching Doctor Who from behind the couch because it's too scary sometimes. And wouldn't you know, it talk about not being careful. It was a new episode. I hadn't seen it before, and it
uh-oh.
turned out to be, I don't remember which one of the Matt Smith episodes, but it was super scary.
Oh
It was creepy
no.
even for a grown up, and he swore off Doctor Who for years after that because
Oh.
and
That's the
boy, I
thing.
felt like that's one of my loss column as a parent.
Yes.
Oh, you weren't
Oh,
careful enough about curating. I like that word that you use, curating what your kids watch, but
yep, it's really
because
true.
I'd never intentionally want to show my kids anything traumatic, but
Right.
so
And you do.
yeah, yeah,
You do. You don't want to put them off, because this is
right,
something that you care about and that's important to you. That's why we're talking about it. I mean, this is the thing. When we talk about Prodigy as a way into Star Trek for younger viewers or for anybody who's, not into Star Trek,
hmm
why do we care? Why do we care about giving people a way in? I mean, certainly Paramount and CBS have a sort of a financial
they want to sell the
stake.
toothpaste, as you've said.
Right, sure, exactly.
When
They
you were talking about that survey, that's what went through my head.
right, exactly, and that's true. They definitely have that toothpaste selling financial stake in getting more viewers into Star Trek, getting younger viewers into Star Trek, because once they get in, they stay in. They tend to, and
hmm
and they're very interested in building the next generation of fans to perpetuate the franchise. Yes, from a business perspective, but creators want that and fans want that too. And
Yeah.
that's where there's this great synergy between art and commerce that happens sometimes, and it happens in Star Trek to a good extent. We all want more Star Trek, and we all want our kids, and we want the next generation engaged in Star Trek, because for many of us, for me, for sure, and I know for you, it's important to us.
Yeah.
It helps us. It is something that has helped us to understand the world and ourselves and our place in the world. And as we go further with that, as we do on this show, our relationship to God and understanding how our faith works out in our daily lives. I mean, that's been huge for me in Star Trek, even just as an adult. Not only as a teenager. I mean, in fact,
hmm
as a teenager, I don't know how much I incorporated those things. It
Right.
wasn't until I took that break and then came back with fresh eyes that I saw the things I see. So it's not just about connecting them with a franchise that they'll pay money for. It's about connecting them with ideas that will help them become better human beings.
Yes.
That's what I keep hearing people like Kate Mulgrew talk about when they talk about
Yeah.
turning people onto Star Trek.
Yeah. They talk about that in this week's episode of The Ready Room, she and Will Wheaton,
Yes.
that this is a way to get the ideals of infinite diversity and infinite combination in front of kids through Star Trek. And talk about diversity. This is the first Star Trek crew with no human in it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even Janeway's a hologram.
Right.
So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's really. I think it's important to always keep that at the fore, both as people make Star Trek and as people enjoy Star Trek. I think keeping that at the core, and recognizing that we're here because of not just what we enjoy as a science fiction adventure show, but as what we value as people, and the values that we want as parents to pass on to our kids. And
yep,
so, yeah, the whole concept of access, it's really interesting that Prodigy came about at this time. And I know it's no accident, but it's really interesting because the whole concept of access to me, or the whole concept of a way into Star Trek for younger viewers, has been a conversation in contemporary Trek for a while because of that objection that you can't have the more violent stuff. You can't have the more colorful metaphors, all that sort of thing, right? There's been that voice that says, we don't like that we can't watch this with our kids. And I've felt that way. I've talked about on the show how if Lower Decks would dial back just a couple of things.
Yeah.
Just here or there, it would be a perfect episode to watch with my kid. It's great. It's exactly his kind of humor. He would love the heck out of it. But I can't show it to him because he's 12.
Right.
So, so it's really great that Prodigy does that. And it's interesting that's come about at this time. Because I think maybe that's Star Trek hearing us. I don't know.
Well, you could be right about that. I mean, certainly some fans have been very vocal about that. So, yeah, it could be. It could be a reaction in that sense, without the negative sense of just being reactive.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, it's no accident. Now that the streaming, and we talked about this earlier, the streaming just gives the franchise space to do that. Because if we were back in the 90s or the late 80s, you get one shot to put a Star Trek series. I mean, when it expanded to 2, right, with Deep Space Nine and TNG on the air, that was really mind-blowing to Star Trek fans. Oh, there's 2 Star Trek series on TV at the same time?
Right.
Plus the syndicated reruns of TOS. My gosh, we thought that was the golden age of Star Trek.
Now we're about to have five.
To be able to have
series.
The space and the resources to devote to, is niche the word I want, or is I don't know, targeting's not none of those words are quite right, but to have different audiences that you can be your primary audience for a Star Trek property. And again, that Prodigy's not just some, there were the ads for Frosted Flakes and there were the ads for Paw Patrol and Blue's Clues, and nothing against those shows. They're not. But yeah, I was like, I'm so glad we're not having like Star Trek Blue's Clues or something like that. Where it's like that whatever that computer program is in the schoolroom in the episode Disaster with the fish on the computer screen that is the dumbed down version of the LCARS interface for the little kids.
Right.
Which, by the way, that's another episode my daughter loves because it has kids in it.
Right.
And we watched that Disaster. So that used to be one of my favorites. But I've gotten sick of Disaster. If I never see Disaster again, it'll be too soon. But she loved it because she has, and also Rascals. She wanted to see Rascals. And so I'm kind of on a tangent now, but my point is she gravitated toward TNG episodes that had kids in them that she could relate to, that she was represented in that way. These are people her age, having these adventures in space. And so Prodigy, I haven't shown her Prodigy yet. I don't know if she'll be interested, but I hope she'd give it a shot, and I think she'd probably really enjoy it because it's kids her age having these adventures, and of course us grown-ups can remember being kids that age wanting to have those adventures. At least I'll speak for myself. Many of us can. Yeah. So anyway, my point is just I guess that it's neat that Star Trek now has the space and the room to do all these diverse approaches.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned representation. We talk a lot on this show about representation. For lots of different kinds of for lots of different kinds of people, which Star Trek is doing really well these days. Well, it's always done well to a certain extent, and certainly within their context, we can look back and say, well, you could have done this better. But hey, for its time,
it's always done better than some other properties.
yes, that's very true. And so, but it's interesting, we don't really think about representation for kids that much. Kids are usually extras. I said on last week's show that I always like to avoid the original series episodes with kids because the kids are always creepy. So it's always going to be an unsettling episode if there are children around in the original series.
They're always creepy or in grave danger, right? Like Kirk's nephew in Operation Annihilate. Not creepy, but his life's on the line. So that's anxiety producing for me when kids are in danger in stories.
Agreed. Yeah, that's true. Well, and then also the, like we talked about the trope of, kids, losing their parents in Next Generation. But it's interesting, Wesley Crusher was created as someone for us to identify with as kids in Next Generation. And it's great because I feel like Wesley is still, or rather Will Wheaton is still a point of connection for me, a point of contact and identification for me
Yeah.
in Star Trek, because I see him and I'm like, oh, he's like me. He's around my age.
Right.
He's a nerd.
Right.
He geeks out about Star Trek the way I do, and so
Yep.
he totally makes Star Trek more engaging just by his presence and his enthusiasm. But it's interesting. Like Prodigy is sort of a whole series built that way about. That the whole series is kids. There's the oldest people in here are Dahl and Gwen, who are 17. And
Yeah.
they're 17, 16 years old. That's how old these people are, and that makes them more relatable to kids. Even in the original concept of the 1970s animated series, there were going to be kids.
Right.
Each
right. It's gonna be, yeah.
each crew member was gonna have like basically their mini me, which wasn't there.
I wonder how that would have played out. I don't know.
Right.
It was. I get what they were going for, but
right. It's kind of that cartoon thing where like nobody can be anybody's actual offspring.
That's
They're your
right.
nephew or something. Like they're all cadets. They just happen to
I wonder
look
how
like
they would have explained that.
right. They just happen to look like the adults that they're studying under. It didn't make a lot of sense. But I've seen artwork, for
Yeah,
that early
yeah.
concept of the animated series. So it's always been kind of around the table, the idea of giving kids access. And that also comes from people saying that they watch Star Trek with their kids. And a lot of people do. But at the same time, we do run into those issues where we do kind of have to curate it, like I was saying. And I feel that way with so many things that are important to me. There are all kinds of movies and things that I don't necessarily want my kid to see at a certain age because I know he's upset by foul language or violence or sexual situations or whatever. And I need to be sensitive to that and be patient, even though I'm dying to show it to him.
Yeah.
I need to be patient, and wait till he's ready. And I think we don't give that wide a berth to religion. I don't think we give that wide a berth to the Bible. And I think sometimes we end up in our enthusiasm to share our worldview with our kids, to share the gospel with our kids, to get our kids thinking about God, thinking about their place in the universe, all that sort of thing. I think we sort of can rush to it, and I think I may feel it more as somebody who's not raising my kid in like a weekly church service. It's I feel like I have to take more of an active role in introducing those things, because there's not a church environment there to do it for us. But even when you're there at a church, I think sometimes kids get exposed to ideas, they get exposed to stories, either that they're not ready for because they're too young, or they get exposed to a lot of political things or whatever, depending on the kind of church you're in, or like you were talking about Prodigy not being simplified and dumbed down and all that it's still Star Trek, still mature in so many ways. I think we want kids to get the ideas of who God is and who Jesus is so early in their lives that we simplify the stories from the Bible. We simplify ideas of theology, and we do it sometimes to a point of where it could almost be said to be misrepresentation.
It can be done well or it can be done poorly. I mean,
Yes.
there are certainly Bible stories I would never dare teach a children's Sunday school.
Right.
Genesis 38 comes to mind. Some other things come to mind. And even, even the Christmas story, questions about Mary's sexual status can become thorny sometimes if, at a certain age. So, but yeah, at the same time, you don't want to give people a faith that can never, you don't want to give people a faith that can't grow with them.
Right.
So I think I don't know. I have raised, am raising one still, have raised two kids in a church environment, and
Mm-hmm.
so I've done it well and poorly at times. I've seen other people do it well and poorly at
Mm-hmm.
times. Like one of the there's something in a lot of Protestant churches, at least, called the children's sermon, where
Yes.
you invite the kids up, and when I have done those because they've been expected of me, and I used to be a pastor, and that was expected. And I found the better ones are when you honestly ask a question and invite the kids to wonder about it with you. If you try to
Mm.
make it what's called the congregational chuckle, where it's just a chance to, oh, look how cute the kids are, and
Mm-hmm.
hope to get them to say something funny or whatever. Well, that's really demeaning to them and not
Yes.
worthy of the gospel. But if you're asking a question about whatever the story is being read, that or the scripture that day in worship, that's something different, and that can be done well, where what do you think Jesus meant when he said this, and get their honest answers and accept whatever they say, whether everybody else finds it funny or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way it can be done well. If you treat the children's sermon as an opportunity to educate and to wonder together, rather than let me feed you some moral platitude and then recite a prayer after me.
Mm-hmm.
Again, these are my personal,
Well, no,
if
I
that's
agree
your
with
thing,
you.
I apologize. But and with the Bible stories too, I think there are stories you don't, I mean, you would never not tell the Christmas story because Mary was a virgin. And what does that mean?
Right.
But there are ways to tell the stories well that are sensitive toward different levels of understanding and
Yes.
different levels of readiness, and
Yes.
so it's a balancing act, I guess. Is I don't maybe have a big grand point here, other than that I think we don't have the luxury maybe that the Star Trek franchise has, because there are whole swaths of Star Trek that Prodigy will ignore, and rightfully so, I'm sure. Captain Kirk's romantic conquests and whatever else is out there that I don't think we'll hear any colorful metaphors in Prodigy. Maybe we'll
Right.
have some alien bad words. I don't know. But with the faith, with the Christian faith, the story of Jesus is what it is, and so you have to find ways to present it in ways that, I mean, the crucifixion
Mm-hmm.
can be very, that's a very violent story, and yet
Mm-hmm.
without that we've got nothing, right? So you have to
Right.
find ways to deal with it without dumbing it down, but in ways that are appropriate, in ways that kids can connect with,
Mm-hmm.
and in ways that won't lead them off in some unintentionally bizarre direction. I know a guy who he heard his preacher preach on the text once about whoever does not love me more than their father or mother is not worthy of me, and that turned him off to the church forever. I mean, he's senior citizen now, and he's
Wow.
never going back, and that's a big reason why, is because that preacher told me I couldn't love my parents, which is not what that
Wow.
text is saying, and
No, not at
probably
all.
not what that preacher said, but that's what this guy heard. And
Yeah.
so it's very, I mean, this is why James says very few of you should be teachers, right? Because it's a risky business.
It is.
And so,
And yet we're all teachers of our kids.
yes, and
You
we
know,
can't get around that.
And
Yeah.
we're all looking for that doorway in. We're all looking for what I found interesting is that we're talking about Star Trek Prodigy is how it's gradually, there are little bits here and little bits there, and just sort of gradually introducing the viewer step by step, piece by piece, to different elements of the Star Trek universe and different elements of Star Trek philosophy and ethics. And I'm going to be really interested to see that unfold as the series develops.
Yeah.
Because that's very much the way that I've dealt with it with my son. He has sensory issues and things, and we could never take him anywhere with amplified sound. And there was just no getting him into a church building. Occasionally, every once in a while, we could do it, especially as he's gotten older. He's better at it now, but there aren't really a lot of churches we feel that comfortable in, or have really been able to find our home in. And and so it's been a challenge. I haven't leaned on that as much over the past 20 years as I did the previous 20 years, growing up in a very, church-oriented family. And people do it different ways. And that's fine. But for me, it's been interesting to try to, because as I'm not engaged in that as much as I used to be, it's hard because I don't always know what tools to use. That's one reason Star Trek's important to me. Star Trek is
Yeah.
is a tool that I use a lot to talk about things that are important to me. And so you end up, and I think this is why it's so important. The work that we're doing here is just part of work that I do all the time with the arts and media and pop culture and culture in general, looking at life with our Christian worldview lenses on. And constantly thinking about things within the context of what it means to follow Christ with our whole lives and our whole selves, that nothing is beyond the lordship of Christ, that nothing is beyond the scope and the breadth and the depth of what it means to live a life that honors God. Every part of our lives is part of that. So as my son grows up, I'm constantly looking for stories that he's watching or reading or hearing, experiences that we're having in life that can be little moments, and sometimes I lean a little too heavily on it. sometimes I press the Jesus button just a little bit too hard, but trying to find those ways to relate to these, to at least relate to greater ideas of who we are as human beings. That's the great thing about engaging with something like Star Trek, because they're usually not talking about God. They're usually not talking about the Bible, although sometimes they do. They're usually not talking about Jesus, although sometimes they do. For the most part, being able to have that vocabulary and that language of being, and this is why it's so important to become a Christian humanist, because you have your humanistic language that you can draw upon to show not just that these are good ideas and these are good ideals just because the Bible says they are. These are good ways to be because God says you should, because you don't want to be punished by God. Therefore, do right. Because you better watch out. You better not cry, right? Because God is Santa Claus. You don't want to do that. But to be able to say these are ideas and these are ideals and these are values that make good human sense, that work in the world that we're living in, that help us to do things right in ways that benefit our neighbors, to show the real world value of that, I think helps to give a grounding for. So when you do talk about things that are theological, it's like, now here's the background to why that makes good human sense and why that helps us and helps our neighbors. It can give, it broadens the understanding. And so for me, that's something that I related to in Prodigy, was that idea of just kind of doing it a piece at a time and a bit at a time. I'm very organic about those kinds of things, And you come from in many ways a more structured tradition, but I have a sense that you probably have a lot of that organic sort of stuff that happens in your everyday life too, outside of your church services.
Sure, and the best religious education, Christian education, I think probably it happens as you're just living life, and we believe the formal stuff has its place, but it's meant to be lived out the other 6 days a week, not in the church building.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I think the other piece of it that occurs to me as you're talking is that we're all children of God, with the emphasis on children, all still having a lot to learn and a lot to discover and to appreciate. Maybe isn't the right word, but we all still have a lot of growth that God wants to give us. God gives the growth, and God wants us all to grow more. And so none of us reach full adulthood or the full measure of the stature of Christ in this life, but we all are hopefully growing, and that's a very Star Trek idea too, in terms of we're all becoming more than we are. As Data says, we're all moving toward that better state of humanity, but in terms of the gospel, we're all continually growing toward the image of Christ, and there are things we can do to help that growth along or to hinder it, and so religious education at all stages and ages of life should be things that encourage growth and open up rather than shut down that growth.
Yeah, well, and growth is a huge concept in Star Trek. It's one of the things that makes Star Trek's character development the strongest. Brett Gray, who plays Dal, was, they were going down the line on Star Trek Day and asking everybody, well, very succinctly, tell us what you think the series is about. And Brett Gray, the first word out of his mouth was growth.
Oh, really? Wow.
He's like, because you get to see these characters grow and mature. And I think, boy, that's great, and such a central Star Trek value and such a central Christian value. Think of all the growth imagery that the scriptures use, that Jesus uses. We talk about fruit, we talk about vines and vine tenders, we talk about trees and gardens and all of these things that faith and life lived with God is meant for flourishing. It's meant for growth and development, and that means, to quote the data that you're paraphrasing, to learn, to change, to grow, and to try to become more than what we are.
Yeah.
I used to use that when I was a professor. I would use that all the time in my classes to say, this is the project of being human. I wouldn't tell them I got it from Star Trek. It was funny. I wouldn't tell them I got it from Star Trek, but I would put some of this stuff up. And I had one student who just, as I was lecturing, went, sounds like you're talking about Gene Roddenberry. And I was like, well, yes, I am. You caught me.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Busted.
Yep. But I do think that's so important. And for our children to see that we are still growing too. That we are still learning too. My son is in choir, and he was talking about his choir teacher. He was like, he was singing and he cracked really badly on a note, and he just laughed, and we all laughed. He's like, oh, that was terrible, And I thought, how great for him to see his teacher, who's a professional singer, mess up at singing. Yeah. And I've been able to sit down with him now that he's 12, and he asks all these interesting questions. And those questions lead us to such great conversations. And I kind of let him behind the curtain, and I say, well, this is how Mommy and I grew up with relationship to our faith. And this is, we got some good from it. We got some bad from it. And we had to try to learn how to do it with you. And here's what we were thinking, and here's why we do things the way we do them. And he's like, oh, okay. Wow, that's interesting, And he gets to see that we're making this up as we go. We're learning. We're growing,
Right.
And we don't know all the stuff, and we mess up sometimes, and I talk with him about the mistakes I've made as a parent, and the reasons those happened, and how I'm trying to do right. And I really think that helps our children understand and relate to us and respect us. Just the same way that we talk about not dumbing Star Trek down, not dumbing religious faith down, Christian faith down. I think when we let that not dumb our humanity down, when we express ourselves as human beings to our children, let them see our faults and our flaws and how we deal with them. That's a way of modeling for them how they can deal with it too. And that's all part of it. And it's this complex network of things, but I swear if you just listen to your kids, really listen to them and take them seriously. Like you were talking about the congregational chuckle.
Right.
That can be very adorable, but that can also be a way that we're dismissive of children because they're so adorable.
Absolutely, it can.
And we just think of them as these cute, fuzzy puppies that we bring out and pet and laugh at and whatever. And nothing that they say or do sometimes do we seem to take seriously. And do we not laugh at? And do we think about and work through with them? And, for me, that's very important. That's one of the most important things when we're talking about these big ideas, these big important things that matter to us very much. I think it's very important to listen to our children, listen to what matters to them, and care about what matters to them. Really care about it. Whatever show they're watching, you watch it with them. whatever video game they're playing. You let them tell you all about how to level up in that thing, and you won't understand a bit of it sometimes, and other times you will, because you'll be like, oh yeah, I had something like that when I was a kid, and this was how it was.
Mm-hmm.
But listening to them and learning from them that's how you learn. That's how you learn to be a good guide, I think. So
It makes me think of the Stephen Sondheim song "Children Will Listen." Because we are teachers of children, even when we're not meaning to be, for better or for worse. And
Yeah.
part of the lyrics of that song are, "Careful before you say, 'Listen to me.' Children will listen." They will look to you for which way to go and how to learn what to be, the song says. So yeah, that's a weighty responsibility. And
Yes.
also in the Christian community, even for those who are not parents themselves, are still in the role of teaching children,
Yes.
and especially in my tradition, for example, and others I know, of course, many other traditions, the congregation takes on the role of nurturing the children in the admonition of the Lord, some of the traditional language. And so that's important. And so I think just, all of us who are adults realizing whether or not we have children, we are teachers of society's children, of our community's children, of our neighbors' children. Again, intentionally or not, and so it's a responsibility, but it can also be a great privilege, and a great joy.
It is, and I think you've said it very excellently. No, that's very true, and it is, and it is something that we think we need to think about, no matter what children we're interacting with, even if it's just a kid in a grocery store. Kindness counts, respect matters.
Yeah.
And it's very important. So I just hope that this has been a bit of a free-form discussion. We always have a bit of a free-form discussion, but I just hope that our listeners, whether they have children or not, are thinking about those things, because even for yourself, you sometimes have to find your way into faith, just like you had to find your way into Star Trek. And sometimes your children have to find their way in. Sometimes friends need to find their way in. And, these ideas and these thoughts about, what's good introductory Star Trek, that helps me think about what Star Trek is at its essence. And that helps me then to understand and unpack it here on the show and other places and in my books and what have you. And that then, of course, leads to the same way of thinking about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to follow Jesus, what it means.
It's all the same. Why does it matter to you?
Yeah.
When you're picking your favorite episode or your favorite Bible story, you're saying something, whether you know it or not, about what matters to you.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And you're saying that to whomever is listening. So,
right.
And finding that out for yourself, I think is not just a great tool to share things that matter to you with other people and with your children, but to further understand them for yourself. Because as you said, I think you pointed out so greatly that we are all children. We really are. Gene Roddenberry referred to us as a child race and an adolescent species. And in many ways, he was talking about our bickering and our quarreling and our squabbles. But he was also talking about our curiosity. And I think there's a great deal of respect in understanding ourselves as a child race. It's not just the dismissive, derisive kind of thing that Q uses against us. And we're in
dangerous, savage child. Right?
Yes, exactly. It's not just that. Children are beautiful. Children are intelligent. Children are wise. Children understand things that we don't understand, and they have a lot to teach us. And so listening to them is as important, if not more important, than just teaching them in a didactic manner. But living life with them honestly, in love, that's what counts. So it's been a great discussion, and it shows the episode title Prodigies. And I feel like, you sort of drew out one reason for that being there, which is saying that we're children of God. viewing all of us as children, viewing our species as a child race, all those things that go back to very Star Trek, very Roddenberryan ideas that echo Scripture. We think of a prodigy, we usually think of like a 4-year-old who can play, Chopin or something.
Right.
Which is fine. But, I don't know that, you've expressed to me off air that, or off pod, as Reed said last week, off pod.
Yeah.
You've expressed to me that you're not sure that the characters we see in Star Trek Prodigy earn the name Prodigy.
Well, not so far. Not so far is what I said. And they certainly don't, like, if any child in Star Trek could be deserving of the name Prodigy, I think of, like, Wesley Crusher, right?
Sure, right.
So none of these people seem so far like Wesley. And that's okay. I like them all. It's not a slight on them. But I thought, well, that's kind of an odd choice for the series title.
Right,
but I don't know.
But I think it's, and we do have Gwen who speaks multiple languages. But I think
True.
I think Prodigy is the name of the ship is the Protostar.
Yeah.
It's something that's going to become a star. It's something that is that's on its way. I feel like the whole thing is about potential. We go back to that theme of growth, and I think that's a beautiful thing to see in all of us, to see in our children, to see in the human race, to see in us as children of God, that we all have potential. We call this Star Trek Prodigy because these children, are going to do amazing things. They're going to reach outside of themselves. And they're going to grow and become something great. And there's a sense where, I don't want to say there's a prodigy in all of us exactly, but there almost is. There's a sense in which we can encourage one another toward the idea that each of us is going to do something exceptional, if not something that normally would be considered that what a prodigy would do. Exceptional talent in a particular area that other people around us don't have. We at least are uniquely ourselves, and we at least are going to live a life that nobody else is going to live. And that's actually really special, and that's really important, and that's really worth pursuing and going after just as much as if you could speak just any language you heard, or some amazing talent like that. You don't have to have a superpower. But so I feel like the idea of prodigies just means, in this context, in the context of Star Trek, it just means potential, and that maybe there's something special to all of us, whether we play Chopin at age 4 or not.
I love that, Kevin. And it reminds me of something Gene Roddenberry said on an old Star Trek record. He said his response to his parents when they were concerned about how bookish he was and they couldn't see past his kind of bookish and lonely exterior, he said, "Ah, how lovely all our daughters are inside, how fearless all our sons, if only we could see it." And I think that's getting at something of what you're saying, of seeing the potential in all of us having that childlike potential to grow and become more than we are.
Agreed. And I would amend him slightly and say how lovely and fearless all our children are.
Yes, I agree with that. Yes, and I would update it as well. But
and definitely how lovely and fearless we all are as children of God. And you know what? God sees it, and still loves us. And like we say all the time, God's love is for you. Yes, you. Not because of your anything that you have accomplished or that you will accomplish, but because of who you are, because you're created in the image of God, and that makes you a beautiful, beautiful creature. And we're glad you're here.
Amen to that. Yep. Amen.
So, Mike, I have an idea for a little bit different kind of question this episode.
Well, I'm always up for a different kind of question, so lay it on me.
So I was thinking, we talked about Camile Saviola earlier in the episode. And, Kai Opaka, I think, left such a big impression on both of us. I think we should just ask each other, what is your favorite or one of your favorite aspects of Kai Opaka as a character? And have you seen that aspect reflected in other people in your life, either priests or pastors or other leaders?
Oh, gosh. Well, I should say first, this is a spoiler, so if you haven't seen all of Kai Opaka's story in Deep Space Nine, you might want to skip ahead a few seconds,
Right.
a few minutes. But at the end of Battle Lines, the second of the two episodes she's in, she decides to stay behind on the planet where there are warring factions. And it's true, there's a sci-fi reason she can't leave, but I think even if it weren't there, she would stay to try to bring peace to those people because she is a person who is deeply committed to peace and deeply committed to reconciliation, and she goes above and beyond to see what she can do to serve these people. And I have known not just pastors or other ordained Christians, but I've known Christians who frankly, more readily than I am to do sometimes, will go above and beyond in the service of peace and bringing people together. And they take very seriously Jesus' words about peacemakers being called children of God. And I was just so impressed with that episode to see Kai Opaka make that choice. That I guess that's her commitment to bring to the, and they're not even Bajorans, they're not even her own people, right? But she's willing to give up whatever future might be out there for her. She says, in fact, I think this is why I came here, and so she embraces that calling to be a peacemaker, and so I see Christians who are and aren't ordained, out in the world working and demonstrating and acting for peace, and I find that very inspiring and humbling and challenging.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I really think her decision in that episode too is an external commitment to peace, to finding peace, to working for peace, but that arises particularly in that moment from a peace within herself.
Good point. Yeah.
A peace with whatever comes at her, whatever happens to her.
Yep.
That she just accepts it and says, "All right, what am I? How am I meant to function in this circumstance?"
Yeah.
And completely shifts, gives up her whole life. And I mean, gosh, greater love has no one than this, that they would give up their lives for total strangers.
Yeah.
For people who she sees as friends, who she sees as neighbors. Even though they live on the other side of the wormhole from her.
Yeah.
And it really is a beautiful image of self-sacrifice and a beautiful image of peace. And I think you're bang on about that. That's great.
So what about you? What strikes you most about Kai Opaka?
There is a gentleness to her character, and yet a pure intentionality of focus. That she has a way of not imposing herself by any means, but drawing people where she thinks they ought to, where she thinks they need to go. There's something undeniable and compelling about her. And yet she's not forceful in any real measurable way. She is decisive, though. And maybe that comes back to the sense of peace. But Kai Opaka in that sense is just, I think one reason everybody loves her is that she's somebody that you just like to spend more time with. Because she seems to be listening to something that you can't quite hear, and seeing something that you can't quite focus on, but doesn't judge you in any way for that, and in fact has the ability to see it in you and to help you draw it out of yourself by being gentle and quiet and accepting and loving. And that is, I think, at least in the way we envision him as best we can from the scriptures, a Christ-like quality that it doesn't come around real often.
Yeah.
And we're drawn to it when we see it because it's really important. So I don't know how to term it, I don't know how to phrase it. It's something it's something a little difficult to hit, a little slippery.
Well, it sounds a little bit like you're describing somebody who is fully present with you,
Yeah.
and also fully present to the holy at the same time, and because the person is fully present with you and fully present with God, they mediate some of that to you.
Without feeling,
is that fair?
yeah, without feeling, without seeming elevated in any way, without seeming
Just
out of touch. In fact, more in touch. It's a groundedness of self and purpose.
groundedness is
That gives you, in a gentle way, and it's just the gentleness of it is important too. But it's that groundedness that lends a reality to everything they speak about.
Yes.
Because you know that they are presently here with you in the planet, on the planet we're on, dealing with the things that we're dealing with a complete unblinking honesty, and yet full, robust engagement. I think that's it. That has something to do with it. It's that.
Yeah.
And I think it lends us a picture. It does, I think, lend us a picture of real human spirituality. Not just religiosity, and a fully lived humanity, and a faith and a life that is ingrained in and entwined in, bound up in our humanity, not in any way separate from it. The fullness of presence that is, it's just beautiful, and it's something I aspire toward, and I'll probably never reach, but there you go. So Kai Opaka, God bless you. Camile Saviola, God bless you for bringing her to life. We miss you. There you go. All right. So, Mike, what do we have coming up next week?
We are going to be talking, among other things, I'm sure, about the next episode of Star Trek Prodigy, which is titled Starstruck.
Lovely. I'm looking forward to it. I'm loving the series so far, and I'm excited. So I hope you will join us, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. In the meantime, please like, share, rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you can do that. And also send us your questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show.
Also, you can support the show by using the support button on anchor.fm/GATST, or by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast. You can support the show, help us make good content, and get some cool perks as well.
That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and until next time,
I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin Sinise, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.